Good day, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about Bermuda's Zero Emission Vehicle public consultation. We'll be starting at about 2 minutes after the hour, but in the meantime, I want to offer the opportunity to submit questions via the QR code that's currently on the screen. We'll get started in a few minutes. Good day, everyone, and welcome. We're excited to have you here. Thank you for attending. My name is EJ Clock-McCook. I'm a principal with RMI's Carbon-Free Transportation Team. RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, is a philanthropically funded nonprofit, and our mission is to accelerate the transition to a clean, secure, zero-carbon energy future. My team specifically is focused on decarbonizing on-road ground transportation. We've been working in Bermuda since 2018, collaborating with the government, private sector, and other stakeholders, first focused on the electrification of the public bus fleet. And as you may know, there are now 30 electric buses on the road and 40 more under construction to be delivered this summer. We have more recently been working with the Department of Works and Engineering to electrify the government's own fleet, and now supporting the Ministry of Transport in developing the Zero Emission Vehicle policy. And so it is with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce the Honorable Minister Ferbert, the Minister of Transport, to set the stage and vision for this process. Minister Ferbert.
Good afternoon, everyone. Barack Obama said, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. We are delighted you have joined our webinar and discussions on Bermuda Zero Emissions Vehicle, also known as ZEV, Policy Public Consultation Document. As the Minister of Transport, I am excited that our ministry is leading the consultation on the future use of ZEVs in Bermuda. The time has come for open and robust discussions regarding policy measures to ensure we evolve and we do not find ourselves with outdated technology. As we know, Bermuda is no stranger to ZEVs. We already have fully electric rental car fleets, and 30 electric public buses are in service. I recently announced the purchase of another 40 electric buses to be delivered this summer. Bermuda will have a total complement of 70 electric buses, achieving 70% fleet conversion. We are already benefiting from the transition to electric vehicles. Since the incorporation of electric buses in the Department of Public Transportation fleet in April 2022, the government has realized an estimated 20% savings in the fuel, which translates to upwards of $15,000 per month. In the past 9 months, the government has saved an estimated $135,000 in fuel costs. As I've stated before, it is the government's goal to phase out the sale and importation of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035. The Ministry of Transport views the advancement of this policy as a significant development for Bermuda that will create a multitude of benefits for the environment and the people, which include, but not limited to, environmental friendliness, as EVs have a zero tailpipe emissions, healthier air quality for residents, which reduces various health risks, reduced noise pollution, lower maintenance costs for the vehicle, and lower fuel costs. We look forward to receiving feedback from the public and key stakeholders. Before I close my remarks, I wish to take this opportunity to thank the teams at RMI, Ministry of Transport, and the various government departments that have provided the resources to assist in achieving this monumental milestone. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Minister, for those remarks and for your support. The entire team is very excited about this process and looking forward to the work ahead. Just a quick reminder to everybody participating to submit any questions via the link provided in the chat. And so now I'd like to introduce Mr. Aaron McKittrick, who will give us an overview of the Zero Emission Vehicle Policy Public Consultation. Aaron McKittrick is a Research and Development Officer with the Department of Energy. He has been working for the department for over 10 years as part of a small but dedicated team who are responsible for helping the government of Bermuda achieve its energy mandate. Aaron has provided technical and project management support on the airport solar project, the government's solar development project, and currently on the Ministry of Transport's Zero Emission Vehicle Policy and Strategy Development. So over to you, Aaron.
Thank you, EJ. Much appreciated. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. So the objective of my portion of today's webinar is to provide a bit more information and a bit more detail on the Ministry of Transport's consultation document. As you can see, the process kicked off with the Minister's press conference on February 2nd, where he outlined the ministry and his goals of bringing in the ban on sales of ZEVs by 2035. What we're doing today is obviously the Q&A webinar, again, to provide you a bit more information, the public a bit more information, and providing you and stakeholders the opportunity to consult, to provide your feedback, to provide questions to the government, to the Ministry of Transport, so we can consider those before developing a policy and a strategy. Again, the public feedback is due by March 23rd. So you still have some time to consider and review the consultation document, which you can find online at forum.gov.bm. Again, that's forum.gov.bm. Please provide any and all feedback, or you can either email us at zevpolicy@gov.bm, zevpolicy@gov.bm. So just following up, why, I guess the question is for most is why now, and what's the purpose of the document that's being produced? So first off, I'd like to iterate and reassure people that this is not a draft policy. So the policy has not been created yet, and that's intentional. The ministry would like to hear from you first, from stakeholders, from residents, from all those who drive vehicles, use vehicles, whether they're motorcycles, cars, pedal bikes, anything in between. This is a consultation process, and what we're presenting today is the consultation document. The idea is that we want to engage with yourselves early in the process, again, because this impacts and will impact all Bermudians. Again, this is the announcement came first on the February 2nd of the original intention by the Ministry of Transport. And we believe, the ministry believes, that this is a unique opportunity for the island, for transitioning to clean transport, as the minister stated, and provide key policy development considerations at this point in time. Before we move any further, I think it's important that we speak to the actual definitions, so there's no confusion as to what is being considered as far as the technology under the policy. So there's multiple definitions, which you'll hear throughout the webinar and throughout the consultation process. First and foremost is the definition of ICE, which stands for internal combustion engine. So those are the petrol and diesel engine cars and trucks and bikes and ferries and anything in between that we use on a daily basis. That's the thing, the vehicles that we use and go and fill up at the petrol station on a regular basis. That's the status quo. The other technologies, as you can see in the slide, that are being considered under the consultation are electric vehicles. And by electric vehicles, we mean fully electric vehicle with no internal combustion engine. And they are powered exclusively by electricity stored in a battery. The second type is a plug-in hybrid vehicle, or PHEV, as it's also known. And this vehicle will have a small electric only range combined with a combustion engine. So hence the word hybrid. It combines both an electric battery and motor as well as an internal combustion engine. And the third technology we are considering is a fuel cell electric vehicle, or FCEV. And this vehicle converts hydrogen to electricity via a fuel cell. So it's producing electricity, which would move a car or turn an engine based on another fuel, which would be hydrogen. 2 points to clarify under these definitions. Hybrid vehicles, so ICE vehicles with fuel-saving technologies, are not being considered under this consultation process. There are no fuel cell electric vehicles options available in Bermuda at this time. Fuel cell electric vehicles would require hydrogen fueling infrastructure for further clarification. So much like a gas station, FCEVs would require more infrastructure or a different type of infrastructure for refueling those vehicles. The policy, as the minister stated at the top of the webinar, is considering a comprehensive phase-out plan for the sale of all ICE, so internal combustion vehicle type and models on the island. So it's a phase-out of the sale of those vehicles. It is not proposing to take away any current licensed vehicles from any owners. Bermuda is, in fact, this is not new technology for the island. We have seen a number of industries and parts of the economy and users already adopting ZEVs on the island. We're all very familiar with the electric rental car fleet by now, introduced in 2017, 2018 with the mini car rentals. All of those vehicles are electric. We're also now familiar, as the minister stated, with the new 30 electric buses, which have been purchased by the Ministry of Transport. And so we're all familiar and have seen these vehicles moving throughout the island. Government is also, as EJ mentioned, actively exploring opportunities to electrify its own fleet. So since 2019, both with the public bus fleet and the government's own pool of vehicles and the post office motorcycle fleet, the government has been looking at transitioning to electric vehicles. So it raises the question, and we've heard it already, why now? Why are we considering zero electric vehicles at this time? The government and the Ministry of Transport believe that the country and we as a country are in a unique position for a ZEV transition. And this is due to a number of factors. The first factor is short driving distances and warm climate, which makes it ideal for adoption. Investment in charging infrastructure will be much lower due to these shorter ranges. There are a number of additional benefits, which we think makes it Bermuda an ideal place for adopting this technology. That is lower emissions, cost savings from fueling and maintenance over the life of the vehicle when compared with an ICE vehicle. Also, another of important things to consider, will be, how will we charge these vehicles? And of course, yes, the question is raised, much of the charging will come from electricity produced by Belco, of course. But even with that charging, there's still significantly superior and efficiencies which come from electric vehicles over petrol and diesel vehicles. Again, a few more points as to why the ministry is considering and why now. ZEVs represent a lower fuel cost based on the charging of through electricity, and it has been known and seen, and the numbers have been crunched and shown that it is a cheaper fuel source than gasoline or diesel based on a mile-to-mile comparison. Electric vehicles are more efficient in terms of how they produce their power over ICE vehicles. They have fewer moving parts, and therefore the maintenance costs are much lower. For example, there's no more oil changes, transmission replacements, or spark plugs to replace. They also offer lower greenhouse gas emissions, even with fueling through Belco and other providers such as those. And of course, because there is no tailpipe emissions, there will be an improvement in local air quality. And a few more important points to consider as to why now. Many countries and regions, as I'm sure a lot of you know and have heard through news reports around the world, are considering exactly what Bermuda and the Ministry of Transport are considering in terms of the ban of the sale of ICE vehicles and moving to 100% ZEV sales by certain dates. We've seen dates by as early as 2025, 2030, and as the ministers just stated 2035 in a lot of countries' positions. In the United Kingdom, diesel and gasoline vehicle sales bans start in 2030, California in 2035. Barbados, our sister country to the south, has made a statement where they're going to move to 100% electric e-buses by 2030. And then Norway, as one of the most ambitious and aggressive in terms of transitioning, has introduced a sales ban by 2025, so only in 4 short years. Most of those that are mentioned are actually legally binding bans. What we're also seeing is that automakers, global automakers around the world, are actually implementing their own policies where they're bringing in zero emission vehicles, models, 100% production of those models by certain dates as well. These include models that we do get in Bermuda, including General Motors, BMW Mini, Jaguar, Bentley, and Mercedes, which have early sort of targets of 2030 by introducing complete model line changes into zero electric vehicles. Important, and to go into a little bit more detail as to what we're seeing by being introduced by other governments around the world. The UK, for example, has quite an ambitious and well laid out plan to transition to ZEVs. And this graphic gives you an idea of the timeline to see how ambitious that plan is. If we look closer, 2022, of course, was last year, but they introduced an EV charging strategy, infrastructure charging strategy, and also they launched a local EV infrastructure fund. And by 2024, they hope to introduce CO2 regulatory regime, including a ZEV sales mandate on manufacturers. By 2025, they will introduce grants for chargers at homes and workplaces and on-street parking. They also will offer a favorable company car tax rates and exemptions from vehicle excise duty will continue to apply. So that already exists. 2027, the UK government car and van fleet will be transitioned to 100% itself. 2030, by 2030, they hope to at least have 2,500 high-powered charge points to be in place across the strategic road network within the UK. The sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans will end in 2030, and all new cars and vans to deliver significant zero-emission capability, my apologies, from 2030 to 2035. And by 2035 itself, all new cars and vans will be 100% zero emissions at the tailpipe. So as you can see, very ambitious plans by the UK. Closer to home, I think it important that, and the ministry thinks it's important that we look at what's happening in the rest of the Caribbean. Obviously very similar in terms of the type of environment, the type of climate, being island nations. Jamaica, for example, has established an EV Council to support the review and implementation of EV policies, regulations, and incentives. This council consists of representatives from the Ministry of Science, Energy, and Technology, and other public institutions, the regulator, and private sector automobile industry. Barbados, as we've heard before, in terms of their ambitious 100% electric bus goals, has introduced a 2019 to 2030 national energy policy, and this is where the bus policy falls under. Cayman Islands, who are often compared to as a transport sector strategy, envisions a 68% reduction in energy consumption from gasoline and diesel for transport between 2015 and 2037. So Bermuda could be a leader in the Caribbean region when compared to countries similar to Jamaica, Barbados, and the Cayman Islands. It would be a first for Bermuda and be a first in the Caribbean to announce a ban on the sale and importation of ICE vehicles. So some key considerations that the project team are considering when it comes to the development of the policy. So something to take into consideration when you're responding to the consultation process. The project team are aware that, of course, if everyone was to switch to ZEVs immediately, there would be an increased electricity demand. And so that raises the question, would there be capacity to produce enough electricity to supply all those vehicles? And to answer that question, I guess electrifying all vehicles on the island would lead to only an 8 to 10% increase in the total electricity demand, and would require 5 megawatts of generation. And so this is easily achievable and could be supplied by Belco, which has an approximately 30 megawatt of capacity, spare capacity to provide. The question about deployment often comes up as well. How will we charge these vehicles? Is there going to be a need for island-wide infrastructure upgrades? Yes, the thinking is there will need to be some high-power charging infrastructure developed, but most charging of vehicles will be done using at the home. So using a simple plug, you would plug the vehicles into your home overnight to be topped up and be ready to be used the next day. The cost also is a question that has been raised in the past. Currently, EVs are about 20% more expensive than their ICE counterparts, but as the global market for EVs expands and the demand for those vehicles increases, we anticipate that prices will continue to decrease and will reach cost parity within this decade, so by 2030 itself. We also see, and have been speaking with the dealers, and we can see that model availability is also expanding and moving rapidly. So we hope to see that more vehicles of those we see in Bermuda and were required under the law in terms of size will become available. There's a question about ZEV maintenance and servicing. Will those services be ready and available? We now know that the local dealers who supply and provide ZEV vehicles to the market have already taken the initiative and started to train their staff and to outfit their facilities with the required tools, etc., to service these vehicles. We do believe, though, that the government can play a role in supporting continued training and education of staff, possibly through the independent garages and possibly in coordination, collaboration with the likes of the Bermuda College and other training facilities. We know this is happening in the rest of the Caribbean, where technical colleges have already started to implement these sort of training programs. A good success story is that the Department of Public Transportation's own maintenance staff have already started to undertake the specialized training, of course, for the maintenance and the servicing of the electric buses. And they have reached and earned level 3 and 4 EV maintenance certificates from the Institute of Motor Industry in the UK. The question and subject of recycling, of course, is a major one. What will happen with the batteries after they come to the end of their useful lives? And it is a question that's being proposed around the world. So this wouldn't be unique to Bermuda itself. Again, the government, the Ministry of Transport, recognizes the current issue of disposable vehicle components themselves, but we think there is an opportunity to build vehicle and battery recycling, reuse, and disposable infrastructure on the island to safely and effectively deal with the batteries once they come to the end of their useful lives. The question of backup, what happens when, for example, when a hurricane, that the power goes out? As we know, this can happen infrequently, I would say, during a hurricane season. So what will happen? Considering the distances we would travel in an electric vehicle and how quickly they will charge, we don't think this will be a significant challenge for introducing ZEVs to the island. There will be ways of mitigating this through resiliency by providing backup energy storage to alleviate any charging gaps if there is an outage to the power provision. Again, because of the improved technology in terms of range capacity of the batteries in these vehicles, Bermuda's ZEVs, and I'm sure if you speak to owners of ZEVs, they will tell you they do not have to charge vehicles on a daily basis. And of course, that benefits us because it will reduce the scale of impact of an outage we would have on an all-electric fleet. So once again, thank you for listening in. A reminder again about the public feedback. We would greatly appreciate any of your feedback, any questions that you have. We are undertaking, as EJ mentioned at the top of the webinar, consultations with stakeholders, but from the public in general, please submit any of your feedback by March 23rd to zevpolicy@gov.bm or to the website forum.gov.bm. Thank you. Back to you, EJ.
Thanks so much, Aaron, for that great overview. Fantastic information and context. Really appreciate it. We're going to move now into a question and answer dialogue in a panel format. I'll be moderating, and Aaron will be on the panel along with Stacey Evans. And so let me now introduce Stacey. Stacey transferred to the Ministry of Transport in 2014 and is the section head of the transport planning team. Stacey has been in the tourism industry for over 30 years, and her substantive role today is managing cruise line relationships as well as cruise ship operational, regulatory, and legislative matters. Stacey works closely with the Bermuda Tourism Authority and key internal and external stakeholders to ensure the efficient integration of transportation services. Stacey spent considerable time listening to the public, researching and interviewing stakeholders, and writing the Transportation Green Paper, a government throne speech initiative published in May 2019, of which electric and hybrid vehicles was one of the key sections. At the Ministry of Transport, Stacey has had key roles in implementation of public and private transport initiatives aimed at enhancing transport infrastructure services, policy planning, and supporting the priorities of the minister. So welcome, Stacy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, EJ. Very, very happy to be here today and support the industry. Thank you.
Great. So let's dive right into the first question. I'm going to start with you, Aaron. EVs are likely quite new to many of the folks listening today and for the public in general of Bermuda. And so it would be great if you could walk us through just the basics of how EV charging works.
Sure. So as I mentioned in the slides a few times in the slides that I spoke to, Bermuda, I think, will be in a unique situation when it comes to EV charging and ZEV charging. EVs specifically, we think, because of our short driving distances and the demand that we place on the batteries and the vehicles, because of our short driving distances, most vehicles, so most residents, most personal cars, etc., we believe will only need a very simple plug you would plug into your house. So it's like charging any other element around the house. I mean, the best example or the best analogy is like charging your cell phone. So you know that when you go home in the evening, that the one thing you do is you put down your keys, your wallet, your purses, etc. You pull out your phone, and the one thing you have to do is charge it, right? You learn a few times that you don't charge it, you don't have the phone the next day. So in this case, I think we believe that this will be a simple matter of plugging in the car. You'll have an outlet at the home, and most new vehicles will come with what's called a level 1 charging, which is just a big cord that you plug into your home, and that will be sufficient for most vehicle owners. There will be potentially requirement for a level 2 or higher charging requirements. That might be for condo and apartments, which have greater demand or may have multiple vehicles on site to charge those vehicles. So of course, with a greater demand, you're going to need a greater supply and potentially a faster supply, because there's going to be different demands on that charging at any one point in time. Part of that understanding is what the government in general is looking at as part of the economic recovery plan. So it's the development of a strategy for public charging. So we're not just going to be, throw this open to the wind and hope that we get this right. There'll be focus specific on this part of the question. So we understand what is the requirement, that we're not overbuilding and we end up with lots of charging infrastructure that's not used. So yes, there will also be a requirement for charging in public spaces, of course, in case you do forget to plug in overnight when you get home. On-street some on-street parking, charging in major car parks, etc. The last type of charging, of course, is fast charging, which many of our listeners might have seen and heard through brands like Tesla with their own charging network in the United States and Europe, and so forth. But we believe these will be few and far between and only needed at strategic locations. So these are, as the name implies, fast charging, and the idea is that these can charge a vehicle up to 80% in as little as 20 minutes. So again, just to reiterate, from the research we've done and the work that RMI has done in other jurisdictions, we believe, because of the driving habits and the distances we drive, that the majority of residential owners of vehicles will only need a very simple level 1 charging, which means plugging into a wall.
Thanks, Aaron. That was very helpful. Now, Stacy, let me turn to you. We just heard about how one could charge an EV, and we also heard in the minister's remarks and from Aaron about the potential cost savings associated with EVs and the pretty incredible cost savings that the buses have already realized. But for the average person, could you break it down how the cost of charging an EV compares with fueling your vehicle with petrol or diesel today?
Sure, EJ. So yes, you're right. It's really great what the public buses have already achieved today with the cost savings. So the way I understand it, based on the average cost of electricity in Bermuda at 40 cents per kilowatt hour, the typical EV cost of about 10 cents per kilometer to fuel, which is the equivalent of 83 cents per liter of gasoline. So basically, if we were to break that down, more energy is needed or lost in ICE vehicles, and less is needed, meaning EV vehicles are more efficient. So EV is the way to go, and that's the way in which we're heading.
Thanks, Stacy. So we've talked about the cost to charge them. Now let's talk about where the electricity comes from. Today, as I think everybody's aware, much of the electricity that's generated in Bermuda comes from diesel generators at the central power plant, although, of course, there is more and more PV coming every day. So given that, though, the diesel generation, I think it's a fair question to ask, how will EVs actually reduce emissions if the electricity is coming from diesel in the first place?
Well, basically, if it comes down to efficiency. So 2/3 of the energy is released when the petrol is burned in the engine and it's wasted as heat. So by comparison, electric vehicles effectively use 90% or more of the energy, which is stored in the battery. So to propel the vehicle, as a result, even in today's electricity generation mix, all EV reduces emissions to 40%. So what does that mean? Again, EVs are more efficient.
Thanks so much. So sticking with you, Stacy, we do know that Bermuda is developing more renewable generation as time goes on. So why not just wait until there's more renewable generation in Bermuda before moving towards electric vehicles?
Well, I think, EJ, as we're learning, if we all watch TV, we all find out what the world is doing to advance the green initiative. We're all watching, as Aaron has just said, what the world is doing to advance electric vehicles or green technologies. We can't wait. So by 2035, Bermuda is planning to reduce the emissions from electricity generation by 35 to 40%. And it aligns well with our strategy. So it will take time to effect this transition, and we don't have that time to move it along. So we have to get moving. And if we wait till 2030 or later, it'll be too late. So why run the risk? Why do we want to be left behind? Why not we be proactive? So let's get it going now. In 2019, you mentioned we did the transport green paper, and we said that we would do this and we'd have the public support to do it. So we're doing it now, and we still need the public to continue to give their responses to this initiative.
Great, great, thank you. So Aaron, let me come back to you then. So we've heard about how to charge them. It's pretty easy. We've heard about the potential cost savings and the emission savings. But at the end of the day, we need EVs in Bermuda to actually do this, right? So can you elaborate on what vehicles have a zero emission vehicle replacement now in Bermuda, and also how this is expected to change over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, one that we see and have heard from different stakeholders in Bermuda and even outside of Bermuda, the question of concern about availability of models. Right now, what we've seen from the data from TCD is that 50% of cars in Bermuda are small hatchbacks and compact sedans. So what we know from having looked at markets, not just in Bermuda already, we've spoken to the dealers, and we can see that there's major brands including Nissan, Hyundai, Kia, BMW, MG, Renault, that are already available. So models, zero emission vehicles, whether they're hybrid, as you mentioned, or electric vehicles, which are already being sold here on the island. So I think people would be quite surprised if they went to their local dealer and started and spoken to them and asked about the different vehicles. What we anticipate is that, and that equates to about 24 different EV models, according to the information we've been given from the dealers. There are the availability of different size. So outside of the small hatchbacks and compact sedans, in terms of larger sedans and SUV vehicle classes, there's more challenge, or not challenge, but there's less of those available to the Bermuda market at this point in time. But again, having spoken to the dealers and them having spoken to their manufacturers, we believe that will also change. We have also seen the increase in availability of electric scooters and motorcycles to Bermuda as well. In the Far East, in China, in Taiwan, we've seen significant investment and development of the scooter market. They are massive purchasers of scooters. And so we've seen at least four retailers locally who have started to look into electric motorcycles and have started to bring in those models as well. You probably wouldn't know it, but some of those motorcycles zipping by you because you can't hear them because they're electric, are electric motorcycles. So next time, have a look, do a double take and have a look, and you'll probably be quite surprised that that vehicle next to you is an electric motorcycle. Again, we feel strongly, and from RMI support in their own research, not only in the Caribbean region, but also in other markets, the availability of EVs and different models is set to improve. It's set to increase. And again, as I mentioned a little earlier, this is because we've seen major manufacturers make commitments to improve their fleets. So developing new models or similar models to their old ICE vehicles, and some have made complete commitments to turn all of their models, or to bring in all of their models to electric and ZEVs by 2030, 2035, etc. We've also seen significant commitments, not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of financing for this investment to transition fleets, coming from Volkswagen, Ford, etc., in the billions and billions of dollars to invest in zero emission vehicles. So again, we don't want to be left behind. We want to make sure that we are staying in tune with what's happening in the rest of the world and make changes accordingly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I'll just add, in addition to that we're even starting to see some of the manufacturers, VW and Volvo as examples, now beginning to wind down their investment in gasoline and diesel technology overall. And so those vehicles will no longer be improving over time, which I think is just further evidence of what you just shared. So let's pivot over to the battery. So we've talked about, or it's been mentioned, the lower maintenance costs associated with EVs because they're simpler machines. There's just less to repair. But one of the questions that always comes up is, well, what happens if I need to replace that battery?
Yeah, and it's a fair question, of course, because the question revolves around what is perceived or is true in certain circumstances as to the total replacement cost of electric batteries. There is a high premium, and that really is where we see the high costs of electric vehicles, mostly coming from the battery itself. So really, there is no specific answer. It really depends on the make and model. But what we do know, and what is being offered by dealers in Bermuda and around the world, are warranties on the batteries. So like any other warranty you would have on a new piece of technology, it's about looking at that warranty and understanding, as a new buyer, understanding what that warranty is, and making sure you read the fine print and understand what the dealer's requirement is if there is a failure of the battery. But just to note this, the typical warranty for a battery is 8 years or 100,000 miles. So it's quite significant. And again, it's when we're talking about changing batteries or maintaining batteries, again, it depends on the battery technology. Not all batteries have to be changed in completely. Some have cells which can be replaced. And just a small anecdote or piece of information, we've seen dealers and users of vehicles drive their vehicles for 15, 20 years on the original battery. It really just depends on the expectation of the user of that vehicle. But again, because of our short distances and because of the climate, I don't think we will see significant challenges when it comes to battery replacement and costs.
Yeah. So nevertheless, eventually that vehicle, that battery will come to the end of its life. And that's been, a question that we've heard raised from a variety of stakeholders since this conversation around zero emission vehicles has begun in Bermuda. So can you talk through how that will be addressed? What will happen when eventually the vehicle or battery does come to the end of its life?
Yeah, it's a very valid question and a very good question, because as we know, in Bermuda, we do have challenges. We're unique and unique in terms of comparison to North America or Europe in terms of disposal, recycling, and reuse of components, electrical components, whether it's a cell phone, your TV, or vehicles. So Bermuda does have to and is considering how we can be better approach this, how we deal with vehicles. And of course, there's multiple ways in terms of how that can be done. In terms of the battery technology itself, it can be repurposed. So when we talk about warranties of batteries in vehicles, that does not mean that the battery is dead. That does not mean that the battery needs to be thrown out. That means that the battery, according to the manufacturer's specification and requirement, does not meet their specification. But as I mentioned just a minute ago, it does mean that the battery does still have some life in it. So we could repurpose those batteries. For example, we could offer, start to use those batteries for energy storage, what's called second life. So now that we're going down the road of solar development and more solar procurement across the island, those batteries could be used in terms of storing that energy for use at another time. For example, as we mentioned, in power outages for hurricanes, those batteries from the cars themselves could be used to repower another car, which completes that cycle, which I think is quite handy. Recycling of the battery is an option as well. We have seen it, and thanks to, again, RMI's research into this area, the markets around the world are developing for recycling, for example, lithium-ion batteries, which most of the electric vehicles, at least, their battery technology is today. So that means that would mean shipping the batteries overseas to be broken down into its components, and then having those components, which can be very valuable, sold to a third party, and then they would reuse those, whether it's back into a car battery or back into a cell phone or some other component. We wouldn't know, but there's still some value in those batteries. So it's a subject area that we do need to explore, and we are willing to explore and are open to hear from stakeholders, anyone who has any specialty knowledge of this technology in terms of recycling, repurposing batteries. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up, and then I'm going to come back to you, Stacy. Aaron, another question that has been raised, because we know vehicle disposal is a challenge in Bermuda, is will this policy or proposed policy create a flood of gasoline cars that needs to be disposed of?
That is not the intention of the ministry. Of course, we don't want to be creating a bigger problem for us, having just mentioned recycling of vehicles, etc., and the challenges we have with reuse or recycling of any type of vehicle. So the proposal and what is being suggested here is the phase out of the sale of the vehicles. So phase out of the sale of ICE vehicles. And that phase out, as the minister stated at the top of the webinar, date would be 2035. So no one is proposing to take away or not license a vehicle that is already on the island before that date. We know there's lots of keen, enthusiastic motorcycle owners of vintage motorcycles, vintage cars. So there's no intention to not license or continue to allow you to use those vehicles. It's simply looking at what we need to do to accelerate and take advantage of the opportunity to transition to an improved technology in terms of general use, daily use vehicles.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay, Stacy. So, as I think we all know, there's considerable revenue that comes to the government from import duty on gasoline vehicles and also the sale of gasoline and diesel fuel. And so, a question that we've heard a number of times is, how will the government replace that revenue when it comes to zero emission vehicles?
Well, that, EJ, I'm afraid, is not a question for the Ministry of Transport. That is a question for the Ministry of Finance, and therefore I cannot answer the question, I'm afraid, at this time.
Thank you. Aaron, let me come back to you for the last question that maybe will hopefully provide some overarching context here. So can you elaborate on what other geographies have done that Bermuda might be able to draw from or learn from to address the higher upfront costs of purchasing an electric vehicle compared to a petrol or diesel vehicle in the near term?
Yeah, so what we've seen, especially in the likes of countries such as the UK and the other European countries I mentioned, and states within the United States, have offered incentives. Now, as most of you may know, and some of you may not know, electric vehicles have 0% duty as it is today in Bermuda. And so we think that's what that incentive has actually encouraged a lot of new owners to go out and invest in an electric vehicle. We have seen some of these incentives not only for the purchase of vehicles, but also for charging infrastructure as well. So there have been grants, etc., tax breaks and tax incentives in the United States and California. But again, coming back to, for example, Norway, where there's no purchase or importation tax on EVs. There's exemptions from the 25% value added tax, their VAT, on purchase of vehicles, and that was through 2022. So I think they've clawed that back a little bit because the incentive program that they used was so successful and they didn't think it was needed any longer. But there's many ways that the government could try and incentivize and balance that 20% increased cost of electric vehicles. But as we mentioned earlier, we do believe that electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles will reach cost parity by the end of this decade. So we're going to see people not being surprised at the first sticker price pretty soon here as more vehicles become available and they reach that parity.
Thanks so much, Aaron. So I'm afraid we are running out of time, so we're going to wrap up the Q&A now. Thank you both very much for your participation. And I'll turn it over to Stacy for a few closing remarks.
So the key message I'd very much like to deliver to our listening public today is that it's very important for the Ministry of Transport to hear from all of our listening public and all of you in Bermuda. If you haven't had an opportunity to tell us what you think about this very important topic today, it's time that you do, and you have until March 23rd to do so. We will be publishing a document on the frequently asked questions that have been spoken to today and the answers that we've given today. And we will be submitting that by the end of the week. But your feedback is important, and you can submit them until Thursday, March 23rd. All input will be considered when drafting the ZEV policy and strategy. So please Don't forget to submit your feedback by the Citizens Forum at forum.gov.bm or via email at zevpolicy@gov.bm. Thank you. Let me repeat that. That's zevpolicy@gov.bm. Thank you. Thank you, EJ.
Thank you very much, Stacy and Aaron, and thank you also to the minister for his opening remarks. We appreciate everyone who attended today, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and questions. Have a great day, everyone.